to another episode of General Conference Conversations, the podcast where we have conversations about General Conference. I'm your host, Kaylin, and I'm super excited to be here with you studying the words of Christ's chosen leaders. So let's get right into it. Today we are talking about Elder Isaac Morrison's talk, We Can Do Hard Things Through Him. And I know I said this a couple episodes ago, but it's still like so crazy to me that we are so close to the end of this conference. This is after this, we have this today and then 2 episodes and then we'll be done. And that's so crazy. And of course, April conference is right around the corner and it's all just moving so fast, but I'm super excited about this talk. I was about to say, I don't know, I have a whole lot to talk about, but every time I say that, I find that I have so much to say. So I'm not going to say that. We'll see how long this actually ends up being. But as always, I encourage you to either listen to and or read this talk before you come listen to me talk about it, so you can get your own impressions and your own promptings, directions of how you should further study or things that you should do in your life, and then hopefully I can add to that and ask questions you might not have thought of. But I'm going to jump right in. So, as I said, it's Elder Morrison's talk from Sunday afternoon session. We can do hard things through him. And as with many of the talks, most of the talks that we talked about, the title kind of gives it all away. This talk is very story heavy, which is probably why I'm thinking that it's not going to be as long, because I just won't have as many quotes to read. It'll mostly be summing up his stories and kind of sharing some of my own. So he starts out talking about the blind man that the Savior healed, and his disciples asked him, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And the Savior said, neither of them, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him, which I think is a really interesting concept just in general. And I mean, that's kind of where his whole point goes, is that our trials are there to help us learn and for us to help others through the same trials. It's kind of his main 2 points of his talk. But I also just love how that's phrased, that the works of God should be made manifest in him, that it's not a punishment. And specifically talking about this, someone who is born blind, and people who have disability, what's the word? I don't want to say develop disabilities, that's not the right word, but if someone is disabled later on in life, that's the way I would say it. If they are blinded later on in life, or they lose their hearing or something like that, that's not a punishment. And that's a really interesting thing. And I know it's hard because sometimes it can feel like a punishment, or sometimes it is the result of, I'm not talking about disability specifically, but trials in general. Some trials are the effect of our own choices, right? We make a choice that starts a cascade of events, but even then, that's part of it. Anyway, it's an interesting thing to think about, right? What is a punishment? What isn't a punishment? Is any of it a punishment at all, or is it all just opportunities to grow? So he's talking obviously about the ones, and this is the first quote that I was gonna read sums up kind of my meandering thoughts about all of this. He says, whatever the source of our challenge is, they can be a golden opportunity to grow. And he says right before that like some challenges are a result of our willful disobedience, and some come from just other reasons, other people's agency, natural disasters, things like that, right? And some do come from God. But I like that he says that whatever the source of our challenges, they can be a golden opportunity to grow. And that reminds me of Elder Bednar has said this on many, many occasions, when he's been asked, or he's brought up the times that he's been asked, you know, how do I know if it's just me, or if it's my own thoughts, or if it's actually the Spirit? And his response always just kind of something along the lines of, well, don't think about it so hard. Like, don't complicate it that much. If it's a good thought, if it's a good thing, then do it. And so I think like that kind of that same logic, right? Like, well, wherever it comes from, we can still use it for good. We can still use it to better ourselves, to grow, which is really a hard thing, right? It's really hard to be in the middle of a trial, in the middle of some challenge, and have the perspective to be like, oh yes, I'm going to use this to grow, right? That's really hard. Like really hard. I understand this. I think we all do. We've been through trials, and it's not until you're like through it and at the end looking back that you're like, oh, that's why, right? Like, and sometimes even then you're like, why did I go through that? And it's not until years and years later that you realize why you did. And I've told this story, I've told this story a million times on this podcast, but if you're new, you get to hear it for the first time, and if you've been around for a while, you've watched all of my videos, you get to hear it again. So when I was preparing to go on my mission, my plan was that I was going to, so I finished my associate's degree, I studied abroad my last semester, and then my plan was that I was going to get home, and as soon as I got home, I was going to start putting my mission papers in, getting everything in, and my plan was that I would go in about September. That didn't happen. And part of it, like, there was a lot of things that went into that. I was paying off some like student debts. I was saving money for my mission. And then I didn't feel the like sense of urgency to put my mission papers in yet that had like propelled me to like want to serve mission in the first place. And so I didn't start my mission papers until September. And then a lot of things happened. I had to have wisdom tooth removed. I had to make sure I got into my doctor, which, you know, wasn't easy, for my physical. And I had to meet with my bishop. He was brand new. He had only been about four months. I was his first missionary that ever went out as bishop. And then his daughter was in the hospital. She was like super young. She was like 7 or 8. She was in the hospital for a while. Anyway, it took a while to like get in and have a meeting with him, and so I didn't actually get my papers submitted until the week after Christmas, I think it was, and I didn't get my call until February, and I didn't leave until April. So a full like 7 months after I had wanted to leave did I finally leave on my mission. And during that 7 months, I was a little like disheartened. I was just discouraged, and I was like, part of it was that it was my own like like lack of action, it was my own procrastination. Like if I had started my papers when I got back in June or May or whenever it was, then I would have been leaving in September. And gosh, if I had just done that, then it would have been different. I would have been leaving when I wanted to, and it was hard because I told people that I was going on my mission, but then they were like, well, when are you actually going? And I couldn't give anybody a date because I didn't have a date yet. Especially like my job, who had been like, oh yeah, I'm applying to go, when I'm going on a mission, I'll be gone for 18 months, so I'll be, whatever. I'm like, but I can't give you a date yet. I can't put my 2 weeks in. I can't like anything because I'm still going to work up until I leave. So I can't give you a date for when I'm going to leave yet. And so I kept asking, well, when do you know? Do you know yet? Do you know yet? And they weren't members, so they didn't understand the whole like papers application process. And I was trying to explain it to them, but I still didn't completely understand everything that was going on. Anyway, so I was very discouraged. And also in that time, this sounds really weird, I made friends. I'm from the rural Illinois, where there are no YSA to speak of. Our whole state had about 15 YSA in it, and we rarely got together. I was YSA state rep for a while, and it was really hard to like make plans and hold functions because everybody worked and there were only 15. So if we did something and only half the people showed up, we only had 6 people come. And so still worth it, but it was rough. And that's how I'd grown up. We moved to Illinois when I was 10, and so all through like the rest of middle school and high school was just me, and my siblings were the only members. And so I had never had member friends. I did, at least that like lived around me. Girls camp changed my life. And I actually had friends that were members, but they all lived, our stake was really spread out, and so they all lived at least 45 minutes away, sometimes 2 hours away. And so I only really saw them at girls camp and like youth dances, and it was rough. And even when I moved to a different ward for a bit when I was living on campus, but there was only like one YSA in that ward, and it was really rough. And so I had moved back in with my family, and I was in their ward again, and our ward ended up having like 5? I don't remember. There were quite a few actual YSA that were active that came to, we had a YSA Sunday school actually, which was amazing. It was taught by our YSA advisors in the ward, and they were fantastic. And they had FHE at their house every week, and people actually showed up to the FHE every week, and it was amazing. Like, it was like so good. And I actually got really close with a couple of the YSA in my ward. Like, I made friends and I hung out with them, and I like went to their house and like did stuff, and we did Come Follow Me on Sundays, and like it was great. And I remember getting to be around the time I got my call, and I knew when I was going. I was like, man, Heavenly Father, now? Like, you're tempting me and not tempting me. You're showing me, and you're actually giving me friends like that. I've never had this before, and this is when you want me to go. Like, you want me to dip for 18 months. I know at least one of these people isn't going to be here when I get back because he's going through medical school and he's going to be moving, and like it was just all really hard, just all over. And also at the same time, so my parents owned a pizza restaurant. At the time, my dad was looking into expanding and opening another location, and I had never really wanted to work. Like, I worked in the restaurant for years and years and years, all the way through high school and college. So I knew that inside and out, and I knew that I did not want to work in the restaurant for the rest of my life. But I was in some of the meetings, they were talking about new expansions and things like that. And he was like, this could be your role. This could be something that you would do. This could be something that you would do. And I was like, actually, that's stuff that I'd actually want to do. Like it's not working in the restaurant, it's working, you know, in corporate basically, like in the back end of things, going in and being people who like trained a bunch of people and then dipped after 2 months after it was open, and like the social media side of it. Funnily enough, I'm actually doing that now. Like I am part of the back end. We didn't end up opening a second location, but I do run our social media and like our digital marketing and stuff. But that's a different story. Anyway, so that was part of it. Also, I was like, wow, I'm actually like looking at a job that I would actually enjoy, and I'm just gonna leave for 18 months. This is ridiculous. And so it was a lot of kind of cognitive dissonance for me. And so I have a lot of sympathy for missionaries going out who aren't completely sure, or are completely sure but like don't want to leave home, don't want to leave a boyfriend or a girlfriend or friends or school or a job, career, whatever it may be. Like I understand that. I have a lot of sympathy for that and a lot of empathy for that. And so it's really rough to leave. We'll just put it there. So I finally, my parents drove me out to the MTC and dropped me off. And I knew within about a week that that was where I was supposed to be, and with the people that I was supposed to be with. I was in a trio, and then there were 2 other sisters in our district, and there were 4 elders, and we all got really super tight, even though we were only there for 3 weeks. We got really, really, really close, and it was absolutely amazing. And I knew that that was where I was supposed to be. And at that time, because if I hadn't gone at that time, if I had gone even a transfer earlier, I wouldn't have been with those people. I wouldn't be as close to those people as I am now. And that caused kind of domino effect for the rest of my mission, right? Like of course I was called to certain areas at certain times, but like if I hadn't been there at that time, I wouldn't have been able to be called to that area at that time, right? And with certain companions, it all just worked out really well. And with every companion I was with, in every district I served in, every zone, every area, people I taught, members I got close to, I knew that that's where I needed to be at that moment. And I met my husband. And I thought about this a lot, that he went out a transfer before I did. So 6 weeks before I did. And so, you know, I was like, if I had gone in September, it just wouldn't have been the same. It wouldn't have worked out the same way. We probably still would have met and like fallen in love and things like that, but like I don't know, it wouldn't have worked out the same way, and who knows if we would have ended up where we are now. I have no idea. That's a lot of what ifs, right? But that's all looking back. At the time, it was really, really hard, and I had that like on the tip of my tongue of like, oh well, the Lord's gonna send me out when the Lord's gonna send me out, or wherever He needs me, I'm gonna go. But I didn't truly feel that. That was just kind of what I was expected to say. And I've had the opportunity and I've had the blessing of seeing why something had to work out the way it did. There are definitely things in my life going on right now that I don't understand why they're happening to me. And it makes me really, really frustrated and thinking, well, why? You know, and I know probably 10 years from now, I'm gonna look back and be like, oh, that's why, I understand now. But like right here, right now, I don't understand it. And so it can be really, that's a long-winded way of saying, it can be really, really, really hard to look at your life and the trials that you're in right this very second and say, oh yes, it's going to be an opportunity to grow, which is a good positive way to look at it. And sometimes you're like, okay, this I can do this, I can use this as an opportunity to grow and change, and I can use this for good. But there are other times when you're just like, I just want it to end. Like I can't think of anything positive, and that's okay too. So he goes on to talk about his own life. He when he got married, he and his wife really wanted, the desire to fulfill the fulfillment of their patriarchal blessing that talked about them being blessed with many children. But after only 3, their third birth was really traumatic and dangerous, life-threatening to both his wife and his son. They both lived and survived, but afterwards she wasn't able to have any kids. And so we only had 3, which obviously to some people is a lot of kids, but you know, they wanted a large family, many children, and but then later on, their youngest son died. He drowned, and they were devastated, obviously. But he says this about it. Though the experience was shattering and we continued to grieve, our overwhelming burden was eventually eased. My wife and I learned specific lessons from our loss. We came to feel united and bound by our temple covenant. We know we can claim Kenneth as our own in the next world because he was born in the covenant. We also gained experience necessary to minister to others and empathize with their pain. I testify that our bitterness has since dispersed as we exercised faith in the Lord. Our experience continues to be hard, but we have learned from the Apostle Paul that we can do all things through Christ which strengthens us if we focus on him. And that's also a really hard place to get to, right? To even acknowledge that your burden has been eased, to even acknowledge that you're not hurting as much anymore is really hard. Grief is really hard. It's a really complicated, horrible thing that we have to go through. But getting to this point, you know, it, like he says, we continue to grieve. They continue to grieve. You're gonna grieve forever, right? And grieving not just loss of people, but loss of opportunities, loss of expectations. That's something that I talk about a lot. Like, it's okay to mourn unmet expectations. I talk about that a lot with my husband and I. We're married now, but we met on our mission, and then he went home early when COVID hit. He had a pre-existing health condition. I was on my mission for another 6 months. He was able to visit me in the States for 5 days, and then we were long distance for a year. And it wasn't until 3 weeks before we were married that I saw him again in person. So we dated long distance. We got engaged over video call. We planned our wedding long distance over video call. It was not what I expected. It was not what I wanted from my engagement. I didn't get I'm going out with my boyfriend tonight to a movie, or we are meeting up for whatever. I didn't get the in-person squealing engagement that I had thought of and hoped for and dreamed of since I was a little girl. I didn't get to plan my wedding with him in person, or even with my mom, because we were living in different states. And then our wedding was also tempered by COVID. My family at the time, so I'm in Canada now, my husband's Canadian, which is part of the reason we were long distance for so long, is because we couldn't cross the border because of vaccine regulations and COVID regulations. So, and then because of those regulations, only my mom was able to cross the border and be at my sealing. And the rest of my family, we met at the border and waved across the ditch in Vancouver. And there are still a lot of things about my wedding day that I even look back on and I'm like, why did that have to happen? Why? And so there's a lot that I still grieve of the way that I thought it was going to happen, the way that I wanted to happen, the way that it actually happened. I have enough distance from that now that we've been a year and a half now, almost, that we've been married. And I can say that has eased, that grief has eased. And I've seen, and then they said this, my word, they said you learn specific lessons from their loss. And part of it is we gain experience necessary to minister to others and empathize with their pain. And that was something with that specifically. One of my best friends, one of my MTC companions actually got married in September. She was really happy. I was able to go and it was one of the best days of my life. But she and her boyfriend, her fiance, they got engaged and she flew home. They were both BYUI. And they got engaged the same day, like hours before he drove her to the airport to fly home to Washington. And so they were a long distance, Washington, Idaho, for 4 months? Now I can't remember, but for quite a while. And I remember her messaging me and being like, this sucks. And everybody's just saying, oh, you know, once you're married, it'll all be worth it and you have eternity to be together. And she's like, but I want to be with him now. This is not how I wanted things to go. And like, I was like, I totally get this. And I was able to tell her, just be like, it's okay to be mad. It's okay to be upset. You know, people are telling you this because like it's true. Like once you're together, it's gonna feel like no time at all. But right now it's okay to feel like this. It's okay to be upset. And that was a huge moment for me. I was like, oh, maybe that's part of the reason I had to go through all of that, so that I could give her this comfort now. And I have other experiences like that, you know, trials that I've gone through, challenges that I have. I've talked very openly. I have anxiety and social anxiety. My proper diagnosis is generalized anxiety disorder with an emphasis in social anxiety. So I'm just like a little sprinkling of extra in that category. Anyway, but I have really good friends who also have anxiety who helped me to understand my anxiety because that's something that they've gone through, and I've been able to help other people with their anxiety and the ways that I cope. It's not the same thing, but suggestions and even just being there and being like, I understand what you feel. I understand how you're feeling right now, and that really sucks. And even just mental health in general, I have so much empathy for people who have mental illnesses, especially ones that are worse than mine. I'm incredibly lucky. Mine is not super bad. I don't want to say like, oh, it's not so bad. Like it can get real choppy sometimes, real sketchy. But you know, I'm not medicated. I have never been medicated. Like I have some blessing in that, right? It's not like I can't get up out of bed in the morning. I can't imagine people who go through that, and I can't imagine what they feel like. But I have some little level of sympathy that I can say, you know, mental health is just really sucky, and I can't help you with that, but I can empathize. So those are this is where my 2 questions come from. One is, what lessons have you learned from past/current trials, and what past or current trials have helped you care for others in similar situations? Sometimes that's the thing that makes it worth it. And it's still hard. Like I said, I still have a lot of grief and a lot of anger and frustration about how my wedding turned out, my wedding day, for a lot of reasons. But it made it just a tiny bit worth it when I was able to tell her, you know, it's okay to be mad, it's okay to be upset, and for her to be like, I just need somebody to tell me that, thank you, and to help even just in a tiny little bit. So I want you to really ponder those, really think about those. What lessons have you learned from past or current trials, and what past or current trials have helped you care for others in similar situations? And I'm sure you'll be surprised at what you find if you've never thought about it like that. And even current ones, like I said at the beginning, what I've said all through here, it's really hard to look at your current trials with any sort of like positivity, because they're not positive. They're not fun. But even just a tiniest little bit of positivity, of you know, I'm going through this thing and I've learned to really stand up for myself, or I'm going through this thing. And I have examples of that. Like, you know, I have things going on right now that I'm like, okay, this really sucks, but I have like learned this one thing, and it's kind of a reluctant thing. But seeing that and seeing how that could possibly translate into the future when you're looking back on a past trial that's now a current one, and you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So yes, I don't have anything else to read from here, but he gives some examples from the scriptures of leaders in the scriptures who were not spared the struggles and challenges of mortality. He talks about Jeremiah, Job, Joseph Smith, and Nephi, and he talks about Liberty Jail, Joseph Smith praying about, you know, where are you? Why aren't you helping us? That actually, so D&C 121, verses 7 and 8 were my missionary scripture, because it gave me a lot of comfort. The Lord saying, my son, peace be unto thy soul, thy adversity and thy affliction shall be but a small moment, and if you endure it well, God shall exalt thee on high. And that came in handy a lot as a missionary when I was going through really sucky times, and, you know, reminding myself, it's just for a moment. It's not going to be forever. This isn't going to be forever. And yes, and he talks about, again, his own experiences, you know, learning, realizing that some of his best lessons learned have been during the hardest times of his life, and then taking him out of his comfort zone. And he lists a couple of things. He also talks about like the blessings that he's seen. He compensates their righteous desires. He talks about being he was a mission leader, and he and his wife were mission leaders in Cape Coast in Ghana, and they served with several hundred missionaries, and they're as dear to us as if they were literally our own children. And so also blessings and lessons from trials may not be the thing that you expect them to be. I definitely experienced that. There are things, like I said, things going on in my life right now, that, you know, I've learned things from them, and I'm like, wow, I never thought that would be a thing that I would learn from this particular trial, but here we are. So I definitely testify, and I don't testify in here often, but I definitely testify that our trials are there to help us learn and grow, and they suck. I won't argue with that. They suck, but that they really will teach you and help you to grow. So, recap my questions. What lessons have you learned from past or current trials, and what past or current trials have helped you care for others in similar situations? And then some further reading, further study. It's a BYU speech that I absolutely adore from Elder Holland, Lessons from Liberty Jail. And he talks all about that time in Liberty Jail for Joseph Smith. Fantastic BYU speech. I haven't read it in a while, but I read it. I've read it 3 or 4 times. It's so good. Joy in Spiritual Survival, which he quotes in here from President Nelson from October 2016. That's a quote that's a talk that has been heavily quoted since he gave it. 9 years ago? No, 7 years ago? I can't do math. And then he also talks about the Family Proclamation to the world. So if that's something that, like that part of the talk really spoke to you, that might be something to read again, to study again. So that's all I've got for you today. But thank you so much for listening to and or watching this episode of General Conference Conversations. If you like the show, please be sure to follow me on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. Subscribe here on YouTube. Follow on your podcatcher of choice. Leave a review, leave a comment, tell a friend. I really appreciate it. Or email me, talk to me. I also really appreciate hearing your stories. Quick reminder also about the study guide. I've said this before and I'll say it again. If you want to get the physical study guide sent to you in the mail, it will take 10 or so days shipping time. It might be a little bit less than that, but like I would plan for that. So if you're looking for that, especially before April conference, I would get on that soon. Otherwise, you can still download the whole thing as a PDF. Pay for it, download it as a PDF, and then you can print it out yourself or leave it on your computer, however you want to do that. That's also an option. All those links will be in the description below. And I'll talk to y'all next time.